You've come again, my dears. I'm so glad to see you. Today, I want to tell you one more thing that you need to know about auxiliaries. Those auxiliaries we've been talking about that go with verbs. I mean, be, have, and the modals. We've been talking about how they can appear in sentences with verbs. But did you know that sometimes they get together and gang up in a sentence? So we can say things like, I sing in the shower, without any auxiliaries, of course. And we can say, I was singing in the shower, with just a form of be as the auxiliary. Or I could sing in the shower with just a modal. Or I have sung in the shower with just the auxiliary have. But we could also say, I would have sung in the shower. You should be singing in the shower. She has been singing in the shower. He could have been singing in the shower. In other words, we can have sentences with multiple auxiliaries in them. All the pieces that go together into making these single or multiple auxiliary verb combos are called the verb phrase in the sentence. See if you can identify the verb phrases in the sentences I just told you. If you said was singing, could sing, have sung, would have sung, should be singing, has been singing, and could have been singing, have a cookie. By George, you've got it. As you might imagine, sentences with multiple auxiliaries are a higher level of grammatical development than using just one at a time. Many kids with typical development don't use them until the primary grades. And, as you might expect too, kids with language disorders take even longer. Working with them to use and understand sentences with multiple auxiliaries is one way we can increase the complexity of their syntax as they move through the school years, my dears. And now, on to our friends, the do family. Let me come clean right up front. Do, like have and be, has different roles to play. In addition to doing the job of an auxiliary in some situations, words in the do family also can be main verbs, just like have and be. In their case, they talk about taking an action, like I do my own hair. You do the dishes. She does the hokey pokey. Because we all did our homework, we got to do spring break in Cancun. So, what do the do family do when they're auxiliaries? Well, I'm sorry to say, my dears, but again, the do family has two different jobs, even as auxiliaries. Their first job is to add emphasis, so we can say, I did do my homework. You do have a funny voice. We do get Columbus Day off. Their dog did eat my guinea pig. Here, do acts as an extra little push to the main verb, as if we were underlining it. But there's a second way do verbs act as auxiliaries. They also serve as the dummy do. Now, Grandma Granny doesn't want to be mean or politically incorrect. It's just what they're called. Dummy do forms are used when we need to have an auxiliary verb in sentences where there wasn't one originally. This has to do with the grammatical rules in English. Do you know the rule for forming negative sentences in English? Let's see if we can figure it out. Now, what if you hear someone say, Common is the best rapper? Maybe you don't agree. So you might want to answer, Common is not the best rapper. You made the sentence negative. How did you do it? Well, it looks like you found the verb is and put the word not after it. Seems pretty easy. Let's try another one. Suppose you hear, Common can act. Maybe you saw him in John Wick 2 and disagree with this statement. You might say, Common can not act. You made the sentence negative again. How did you do it this time, my dears? Did you find the verb and put not after it? You didn't. The verb here is act. You didn't say, Common can act not. What did you do? If you said you put not after can, which is the auxiliary verb, have a cookie. You're right. That's just what you did. Now, suppose you then say, Common has been invited to the White House. Maybe your friend doesn't believe you. What does she say? She says, Common has not been invited to the White House. He could not have been invited there. It's true, you say. Look it up. President Obama invited him. Yes, you're right, but how did your friend form the negative sentences she confronted you with? Did she put not after can? No, there was no can or is in these sentences. So what did she do? Well, we said can is an auxiliary verb, remember? Look at these sentences again and see if you can decide how she did it. If you said she found the first auxiliary verb in each of the verb phrases in these sentences and then put not after the first auxiliary, have a cookie. Great thinking. That is the general rule in English for forming negatives. Find the copula or the first auxiliary verb in the verb phrase and put not after it. I think we've got it. But wait, what if there is no copula or auxiliary? What about a sentence like, Common eats meat? But no, you think. He's a pescatarian. He eats only fish. So what would you say? No, he does not eat meat. Huh? Where does the doesn't come from? Did you guess it? It's the dummy do. It's the form of do that matches the subject, the third person singular he, and the verb tense, the present tense, eats. We'll talk more about subject-verb agreement in just a bit, my dears. But if your friend had said Common ate meat at the White House, you might protest, no, he did not eat meat. He's a pescatarian, where the form of do matches the past tense form of the verb ate. You get the idea, though. The general rule for forming negatives in English is to find the copula or the first auxiliary in the verb phrase and put not after it. But if there is no copula or auxiliary, we put the correct form of the dummy do in and put the not after that. You can form a contraction with the auxiliary or not if you want. So you could say he does not eat meat or he doesn't eat meat. He did not eat meat or he didn't eat meat. I don't eat meat either, or I do not eat meat. Now be honest, my dears. Did you know that rule already? Oh, but you did. You could form all those negative sentences and recognize them as correct with no trouble. Knowing rules like this is part of your linguistic competence or the implicit knowledge about language that every speaker has. You use rules all the time without thinking about it. What you might not know already is how to state the rules. Maybe you did not have explicit knowledge of the rule. For everyday speakers, explicit knowledge isn't always necessary. They can use rules without even knowing they know them. But for us as language therapists, we do need explicit knowledge, not because we're going to teach it to clients. Heaven forfend, my dears. But because we need to know what they need to learn in order to provide them with the models and functional practice of forms they haven't learned yet. You'll probably never have to explain this rule to a client, but might help you to know it when you're working with a 5-year-old who says, me not ready, when you ask him to come to his session with you. It may help you to know what kind of negative sentences to start modeling in playful activities and how to move forward to more complex ones once the earlier ones are learned. And by the way, just so you don't feel you've wasted a lot of time learning how to form negatives, this rule works pretty well for forming questions too. So see if you can figure out how it works in sentences like these. Common is a rapper. Is Common a rapper? Common has been invited to the White House. Has Common been invited to the White House? Common eats fish. Does Common eat fish? Questions and negatives are both types of sentences that go through several stages in typical development and cause problems for kiddos learning language. When you study child language development, you'll learn those stages and be prepared to guide kiddies who need help through them. One last word about auxiliaries. As we've seen, when kiddos first start expanding their verb phrases with auxiliaries, they don't learn them all at once, but in stages. A special kind of auxiliary appears in the very first stage of this process, and these are sometimes called semi-auxiliaries or catenatives. They're called semi-auxiliaries because they act like auxiliaries even though they aren't one of the official auxiliaries that we talked about. They're called catenatives because this word comes from the Latin word concatenus, which means chained, and they allow verb phrases to be chained together. Kiddos learn these forms as unanalyzed wholes. They don't realize at first that these forms are made up of several smaller words, and the kiddies use them as if they were one morpheme. That's one reason they appear early and are considered primitive forms. The most common ones are gonna, wanna, gotta, have-to, supposed-to, let's, and lemme. So you can see that gonna will eventually be analyzed into the three morphemes go, ing, to, have-to the two morphemes have, to, and so on. I don't mean that the rest of us don't use these forms too. I'm not going to lie. We do. But we implicitly know the morphemes that make them up, even if we don't pronounce them or pay attention to them all the time. That's why if you tell Grammar Granny, I have to get out of here, I've had too much grammar today, with her bad hearing, she might say, what? And you would probably repeat yourself more clearly, saying at the top of your lungs, I have to get out of here. Not surprisingly, many little kiddies don't have this implicit knowledge until 4 or 5. And our kids with language impairments will be much slower to take this first step towards complex verb phrases. When they do, it's a good sign that they may be ready to learn other verb forms that appear at the same time in typical development, so we want to keep our ears open for these forms as we work with our young language clients.